Hi, this is Mrs. Melchetter with your notes on water. So water is a very important topic in AP Bio because we do a lot of cellular stuff. We talk a lot about cells, and cells are somewhere between 70 and 95% water, depending on what type of cell it is. Water is really unique in its properties, and it's a really cool substance when we talk about it. So it is a polar molecule, and if you remember from the last time we talked, polar molecules are ones that have those covalent bonds, but there's unequal sharing. So if we think about that oxygen being just slightly more electronegative than the hydrogens, and it's going to pull those electrons a little bit closer to itself, which is going to create the V shape that we see in the water here. Okay, so it causes a little bit of a charge on the hydrogens to be positive, and because that oxygen is holding those electrons just a little bit more, it's going to be a little bit negative. And on top of that, when we get this, that's going to cause water molecules to be attracted to each other, so we can see in this image. So the slightly negative part of the oxygen is going to be attracted to the slightly positive part of the hydrogen. So one of the special properties of water or two of them, are cohesion and adhesion. So cohesion is when water molecules stick together through that hydrogen bonding, that H is a little bit positive, O is a little bit negative, and they're attracted to each other. Okay, that's called cohesion. They're or together. Adhesion is another property of water, which means that water clings to other substances, and again, through hydrogen bonding. So a slightly negative charge would attract the slightly positive part of the hydrogen. And this is super important for plants because it's what helps plants, get water up the stem. So the waters stick to each other and kind of form a little chain, but then they also stick to the plant cell walls called the xylem, and that helps them to move up all the way from the roots all the way up to the top of the trees or the plant. Another important property of water is its surface tension. And again, this has to do with its hydrogen bonding. But the surface tension is how difficult is it to stretch or break the surface of a liquid. And water has a really high surface tension. We've all seen surface tension when we've poured something. I know I'm notorious for spilling my coffee because I don't quite break that surface tension, and it kind of like plops out and spills. A lot of students have also done the penny experiment. How many drops of water can you fit on a penny before it goes all over the place? And as you're doing that, you can see the water just kind of mounds up, and that's because of the surface tension. And that's all the hydrogen bonds. So at the top, there is a lot of stronger bonds because they form like extra bonds between the molecules that are at the top. And then you've got some bonds between the other molecules, the other water molecules that are in the layers underneath. But water has a high surface tension, so it takes a lot to break this, which is why this water strider can sit on top of the water. Another thing that we need to talk about when we talk about water is the temperature and heat capacity of water. So just as a quick review, temperature is the kinetic energy of molecules, doesn't matter how much of it we have. And heat is transferring energy. So we're transferring that thermal energy. Okay. So when we transfer that energy, we're going to say a calorie is the amount of that heat, that transfer of energy that it takes to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. It's kind of a weird thing to call that a calorie because we tend to think of, oh, this granola bar has 100 calories in it. But it's how much heat transfer does it take to raise 1 gram of water or 1 gram of the substance 1 degree Celsius. So the cool thing about water is that it's really good at absorbing heat from the air that's warmer, and it can also release heat to the air that is cooler. And because of that, because of its high temperature, it can absorb a lot of heat without much change in the water temperature itself. So if you've been on a beach, you've probably experienced this. You walk through the sand and it's super hot, and it may only be like 11 o'clock in the morning. And then the water is relatively cool. Okay, so water doesn't absorb as much heat as quick. Well, it absorbs a lot of heat, excuse me, but it doesn't change the temperature of the water as quickly as other substances. Okay, so we call that specific heat. So the specific heat is what is required to change that substance, 1 gram of it, 1 degree Celsius. So you can see in this chart over here, the water is pretty high, liquid water being the highest. And then you get down to some of these other like granite and basalt, and it's not even 1. Okay, so water specific heat is very high, which again means it's going to change its temperature less often. That's really good because if you're an ocean animal, you don't want the water fluctuating from 90 degrees to 50 degrees in one day. You want it to stay relatively constant so they can maintain homeostasis. We also don't want like our temperature, our water inside of our cells to go really hot and really cold all the time. That would not be good for us. One thing that we do want, though, is to use water to our best of our abilities to be able to stay cool. And that's called evaporative cooling. And that's part of the high specific heat of water. And it's also dealing with water's cohesion, its attraction to each other, and they're close together. So when that water gets heated and gets moving fast enough, it can turn into a gas and then evaporate or leave the surface, and it leaves us cooler. Okay, so one of the things that people always notice is when in Wisconsin, it's humid here and you're sweating, but like you just feel sticky and gross. That's because that water that your skin is putting out to try to cool itself down, it's not going anywhere because there's already so much of it in the surrounding air that the air is like, nope, I'm not taking any more of that. And so we tend to get really hot because we're not able to cool off. So that's why Wisconsin summers are a little bit worse than in other places. Or if you've heard anybody say, oh, but it's a dry heat, that just means that you're able to sweat better. Okay, and then one other thing to talk about is ice. And water is really cool because it is less dense as a solid, and that usually doesn't happen. So that's a very unique property to water. So as water freezes, the molecules kind of hold themselves apart and like push out and hold themselves apart. So they're more spread out, and that causes them to be able to float in the liquid form of itself, which again, like I said, is a unique property of water. And it's those hydrogen bonds that are keeping each of the water molecules apart from each other. And this is really good for life. I'm not sure what this man is doing. I just thought it was an interesting picture. But when you have, if you were to have solid water, so ice, if it were to be more dense than the liquid form, it would fall down. And then the next layer, the top layer would freeze, and then it would sink down. And then the top layer would freeze, and then it would sink down. And you can see pretty soon the whole pond would be frozen, and nothing can live in there. So it's not like they can get down on the bottom and live in the bottom area where it's still liquid. So that wouldn't be good. We'd lose a lot of our water life, anything that lives in the water. And then the last piece of water is that it is the solvent of life. When you have a solution, you have a homogeneous mixture of two or more substances. Water is a really good solvent. We use it in a lot of things in our bodies. And again, our cells are 70 to 90% water. So the dissolving agent is called the solvent, and in an aqueous solution or a water solution, the water is the solvent, and then the substance that's in it is called the solute. So like the salts or sugars or stuff like that. And water is one of those things it's called a universal solvent because many things can be mixed into the water, and those little molecules, the little water molecules, again, the positive parts will be attracted to negative pieces, and the negative pieces will be attracted to positive. And that's what happens when you put salt in water. Salt dissociates, it pulls apart into the positive sodiums and the negative chlorines, and the positive sodiums are attracted to those negatively charged parts of the water, the oxygens, and the negative chlorines are attracted to the positively charged hydrogen parts of the water. And so it gets like surrounding them. So I hope that has been a decent description of what water properties are. You'll be watching another video and working through some questions associated with all the different properties of water. And before I go, I did forget to say the difference between hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Hydrophobic, they are nonpolar. It doesn't form hydrogen bonds, and they are repelled by water. And hydrophilic, those are things that can form those hydrogen bonds, and then they are going to be more attracted to water, and they're polar. Have a great day. Thank you.